Okay, it looks like pretty much everyone is seated, so I'm going to get started. It's attached, so I can't do a mic drop. Okay. My name is Estelle Weyl, and my slides are up at estelle.github.io/components. If you just go to Estelle, just remember my name, Estelle. It's not that hard. Go to my GitHub page, and there's not just this deck, but there are all the decks for all my presentations. So you can learn this, and you can learn other stuff too. A little bit about me. I can be found on Twitter at EstelleVW. I am a Twitter whore. Please follow me. That is the only reason I speak at conferences. And these are some of the books that I've written or am writing. And Mobile HTML5, the conference bought a bunch of them, and we're going to be selling them for donation for Black Girls Code. So you can give whatever donation you want, but I think I'm going to be at the registration desk doing that. So if you want a copy of the book, it would be great if you made a donation. Okay, so let's talk about web components. One more thing, if you guys have your computer open, there's little arrows here. They're going to be in the top center of the page. That actually links to the example that I'm talking about. So there's the example code for everything that's in this presentation. And if you are on a page and you want to take notes, you can just hit the number 4, and it's saved in local storage, so you can just type in whatever you want, and it goes away, and it comes right back, and it's saved. So if you want to take notes, that's a good way to do it. Okay. So let's talk about web components. What are web components? I'm going to read you a slide because you guys don't know how to read. Encapsulated and reusable components for the web. What does that mean? Let's show you by example. This is the current state of affairs. Can anyone tell me what this is? It has 2 hints in it as to what it is. But it's completely non-semantic. If you look up here, this looks like it could be speech. And if you look down here, it says Google logo. So my assumption as to what this is that the little icon in the right-hand corner of the search box on Google home screen, that is the completely semantic interpretation. That is the code that they've put behind it. You used to be able to just do x-webkit-speech, and then when you clicked on that icon, you could actually talk, and it would recognize it. But they took that out of WebKit, and this is what we have now. Unfortunately, it's not semantic. But can you imagine if they simply put in speech-icon, speech-icon, and that was it? Well, that would be a web component. It would be a semantic way of explaining to you what an element does. And it's a custom element. It is something that you create. So we do have web components, and this right here is a web component. This is 1 line of HTML and 1 line of CSS to create this. Can you move the mic up? Sure. Is this better? Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you. So what is the code? I put 1 line of CSS that says display block and height 600 pixels. Pretty easy. And then it says Google Map, which is a custom element. That element does not exist. And it gives you a latitude, longitude, and it ends the Google Map. Pretty simple. It has a template behind it, and this is what I'm importing. And the import is basically the Google directions and a Google Map, and it's in the template. Template element is something we're going to cover. Basically, web components are 4 components. There's custom elements, import, template, and shadow DOM. So the import is the top line. I'm going to explain this 3 times, so by the end you will get it. The top line says link, rel, import, and it imports an HTML file, and in that HTML file, that explains everything that it needs to know, and that the code below it's below that. And there's a fallback. Because if the browser doesn't understand the Google Map, it will still read what's inside. So in this case, we're just sending a giant's PNG. And that's what we get. So web components enable us to create semantic code. It enables us to completely separate out JavaScript for behavior, CSS for presentation, HTML for content. In that first example of that search speech logo or speech capability, there was a lot of it was separated. There was CSS, there was JavaScript, and there was HTML for content. But it provided us with like 412 divs and spans that really were not semantic and really weren't content. They were for presentational reasons or as hooks for JavaScript. It allows us to silo our code. It allows us to encapsulate CSS. One of the problems we've had with CSS is CSS hits the whole document. We can actually, with web components, make CSS just hit the one element that we're creating. It's native, so instead of importing an entire framework, like handlebars, it's right in the browser, so it has better performance. And it reduces the number of DOM nodes, which if you know, especially in the mobile space, when you have limited memory, and Douglas Crockford said that people have gigabytes in their pockets, that is inaccurate. The iPhone has 1 gig. The latest Samsung, just to be different, has 3. But the most popular phone sold in India is 128 megs. So depends who you're trying to hit. But if you're only trying to hit iPhones, you can only hit iPhone 5 and 6, because before that, it was a half a gig. OK, back to my talk. OK, so I said there's 4 components, and now we are going to actually cover the 4 components. Template, shadow DOM, and the content element. Most people think the content element is part of the template. It's actually found in the shadow DOM, so that can be a little bit confusing. HTML imports and custom elements. So our task for this is to design or develop the name tags for this conference. Unfortunately, I did not see the name tag until today. They were supposed to send me a copy, and I could have made it really pretty. But instead, we have this hideous shade of brown, which looks even worse up there than it does on my screen. But the HTML that I'm going to be using in the end is just name-tag with the role of speaker and the name of Estelle Weyl. And it's going to invert it so that Estelle Weyl is on top. And it's going to put the header and the footer and make all the colors beautiful. But our HTML is just going to read that. So that's our goal. So how would we do that now? Oh, sorry. I jumped ahead of myself. So, oops. In the end, I'm going to create a template. And it's going to have this document fragment. So it's going to pull in all the bells and whistles just once. And that's what templates help us do. It's going to create a shadow DOM. We're going to create a shadow DOM. So the CSS for that name tag is only going to be for that name tag. It will not affect the entire document. So that font that I'm pulling, I'm not actually pulling in a font. It's just using a font that's on the computer. But that font is only going to hit the H3 or the header of that name tag because it's going to be in the shadow root. I'm going to actually import that name tag template with an import. So my HTML will only have those 3 name tags in it. That is it. It will have 1 import and 3 divs with the roles and names. And then I'll be using the custom element of name tag. So that is what we're going to build. So is this supported? Of course, I'm up here, and therefore my wireless is no longer working. Let's try it one more time. Nope. OK. So in terms of support, it's partially supported in a lot of browsers, and Chrome and Opera have full support right now, and IE has no support whatsoever. Firefox did say right now import is behind a flag. They've decided not to ship with it, but they do have polyfills. So can we use it now? Yes, we can with these 3 libraries of Polymer, Xtag, or Bosonic. I'm not going to talk about the polyfills, because what I want to do is I want to teach you what the how to actually code it. That way, when you use Polymer or Xtag or Bosonic, you actually know what's going on behind the scenes. What is it polyfilling? I want you to understand how web components are developed. So this is how we currently code. If I were to do my name tag right now, I would create a div with an outer shell, with the logo, with the tagline, with the inner area that's going to be background of white, with my name, and the role in the correct order, and then the footer. And the thing is, this is how most people are programming it. So we could add a little bit and make it more semantic by putting a header, a main, and a footer. But main is only supposed to be once on a document, so that's not the best because we actually want 3. If we were doing this from the server side, and having many name tags, this is what the code would look like. If we're doing it client-side, we could pass an object or JSON with the roles and the names, and then we would create an element, and then we would iterate through it, and then we would create the template with the outer, the header, the P, the main, the name, the role, the footer. Then we would add the 4 classes, and then we would actually append everything. It works, but who wants to code this? So we have templating, and this is a handlebars template, but who wants to import an entire framework just for a name tag? I don't. So this is what we're going to, in the end up with. Semantic element called name tag. We know exactly what it is, and that's going to be it. And we're going to import the rest and use a few lines of JavaScript, like 5 lines of JavaScript, to make the whole thing work. So let's start with a template. A template, I'm going to read again, is a document or file having a preset format used as a starting point for a particular application so that the format does not have to be recreated each time it is used. That is, it's a noun. Okay. In terms of developing, a template is, what it gives you is absolutely nothing. You load a template on the screen and you get, with all of that content in it that we're going to have, with the header and the footer and the main, it's going to be blank. There's nothing going to show on your document, because that's what it provides you. It provides you with something that is invisible, that you can actually take it and clone it and replicate it multiple times. So you can pull it in without using it. And you can pull it in and use it later. Or you can pull it in and basically put your video in there so that you have the link to it, but you're not downloading the video or the JavaScript. Whatever you put in it is innocuous. It doesn't impact. You're only basically pulling in the bytes when you're pulling it in. In rendering, the template element represents nothing. So I already said this. It's inert until activated. It has no side effects. So if you just call it in and you have a JavaScript, it won't actually run. Anything inside your template element will not run or will not download images until you actually activate it. You can put it anywhere. You can put it in the header or the body, or even between the two. And I actually think there's an added benefit if you're not using this for web components. If you're just using it as a template, it can actually improve performance by enabling you to make fewer AJAX requests later on, because your content's still there and you can just pick and choose. And so you're not waking up the radio if you're on a mobile device. And another thing with it is designers can use it to create rich interaction without actually impacting the rest of your code. Okay, so how do we use templates? We feature detect, we declare the content, and then we activate the content. In terms of browser support, apparently now I have internet access. Oops. You'll see here, oh, this is template. It's very well supported, except for IE. And then the other red is Opera Mini, which that's normal. They try to improve performance, and they give you already pre-made pages. Okay, so how do you feature detect? You basically say, is content in a template when you create a template? Either yes, and then you can use it, or not, then you have to use a polyfill. Then inside your template element, you have the template element, you can have style, you can have content, then you can have the content element, and then you can have any scripts. Or you can have any media you want as well. So this is how it would look. You have the template up top as the shell. I'm giving it an ID. I don't have to, but I'm giving it an ID just to make life easy for myself so I can call it later. And then I have this element somewhere inside called content. And that is where the content within my name tag will go. So in the case of our template, for our name tag, we have template called name tag template. We have a bunch of CSS to make it really ugly. And then we have the header, the footer, and the main. And inside the main, we have the content, which is where the name and the role are going to go. Oh, I didn't have to drop down. I added a slide so that I wouldn't have to go down, but I did. OK. And in our HTML, we have this simply div class name tag with the 3 names. What does our JavaScript look like? The simplest way of doing this, and the most HTML, like this doesn't give you the shadow DOM, but the simplest way is you just basically say, hey, find the name tags, get the element that is the template, and then loop through all the name tags and copy the contents of the template. And so what we're doing here is, with the clone, we do document import node, the template content is true. So what does that do? That takes what was in our little div class name tag, the name and the role, and it pulls it in where the content element is. Template content, right there. There's two different ways of doing it. We have what we've done up here, which is document import node template content true, or template content clone node true. You can do it either way, they both work. And what does that give us? It gives us this. That works, except for this scenario right here. My speaker word is first. And there's one other thing that I don't like about this, which is if I do body, outer, this is the CSS is for the whole document, and it is impacting my template content. And that's not what I want. So what we're going to teach you is how to make it so that this doesn't work, that you would actually have to do shadow outer. And right now that's not working, but let's get to that. Okay, so before we get to that, the HTML that was basically created, because I wasn't using shadow DOM, is with the content of clone node, I just put the content into these two, into this element right here, into the content. And then with this method, I also replicated the styles 3 times, and we don't want that. So let's figure out a better way of doing it. To do it a better way, we use shadow DOM and the content element. The content element is actually part of the shadow DOM specification. So the content is the insertion point where we're going to take the content from our custom element, or right now just that div with a class of name tag, and that's where the content of that div is going to go. So right now the role and the name are going where the content is. Right there in the yellow, or right here for people who are colorblind. I'm highlighting it. So these 2 lines are going to go into one, these 2 lines are going to go in the next, and these 2 lines are going to go into the third. So what I do is var template. This is what we had before. This is the exact same code that we had before. The difference here is I'm creating a shadow root. And there's 2 different ways of doing it again. So basically the only difference is instead of appending it to the parent div, that class name tag, we are appending a shadow root to that parent name tag. And we get the exact same look and feel with speaker and my name here. But there's a difference, and the difference is right here. It says shadow root. We have name tag, then we have this shadow root that's created, and then we have outside of the shadow root the role and the name. And these 2 are not actually displayed. What is displayed is basically it sticks it in here. So we've talked about content, but my name and my role as speaker are still in the wrong order. You can, however, have multiple content elements if you use the select attribute, and the select attribute uses a CSS selector to place the correct element or the correct content in the correct location. So if you had noticed before, oops, I'm going to inverted the slide, sorry. Here I have content select name and content select role. So the element that has the class of name will be in the top, and the element with the class of role will be in the second one. And so here, when I had inverted it, it will actually go into the correct location. So this is my original code, and you see that I have the class of role and the class of name. So in here, it will go to the appropriate location. And it's the exact same JavaScript. It's create shadow root and append child template content. Oops. Okay. So what we have is a simple HTML as a template. So you're not asking because you're nicely polite and quiet, but what about if you don't actually, like if you have information that is not in, doesn't have the class or isn't actually captured by anything? Originally, we just used content and it grabbed everything, right? And then we used content with the select, quote, dot name, and dot role. And so it grabbed just those things with those selectors. To grab the rest of the content, or what we did originally, which was grabbing all the content, you do content simply empty, or with an empty select, or with a global selector. And then we'll grab everything. Just note, if you're going to do any one of these three, this has to go last because it collects whatever hasn't been used yet. So if I had role, name, and company, it would actually grab company. But if I did the global selector first, it would grab all three, and then it wouldn't have anything left for name and for role. Okay. So what does this create? Remember the last time when I did body, outer, it turned red, it changed colors. Now it doesn't because it is scoped. The CSS that is in the template is scoped to that shadow root. So if I actually want to make it red, I would do shadow. So you can communicate with CSS between the parent document and the shadow root, and from the shadow root to the parent document, but it doesn't do it by default. By default, when you're using a shadow root, the CSS is scoped. Show you this by a different example. Here, I have the page CSS, which says H3 color red, and then I have the scoped CSS, which says H3 color yellow. And I'm going to do text decoration underline, just in case we do have people who are colorblind. So the first one is underlined. Those are H3s. And the second one is also, the red one at the bottom is an H3, but it is not underlined. If I did this, shadow, oh, it doesn't work because I didn't type it correctly? Yeah, okay. It's a double colon notation. So here in this example, you saw that I was able to go from the page CSS and actually target the shadow DOM, but I had to explicitly state that I wanted to. And then here, H3, I could do, and there I added host, H3, and so it underlined it for me. So you can actually communicate with the CSS between the two, but you have to explicitly choose to do so. So it's really nice to finally have scoped CSS. Okay, but you've probably come across the shadow DOM shadow root many times. This is a picture of an input type of range, and you have a little thumb, and it has a pseudo class of WebKit slider runnable track, and you can actually style that in some browsers. In this example, you have the day picker, and here you can actually pick dates or get the calendar, and it has right here shadow root that's produced by the user agent. Here you have the video controls. Again, it's part of the shadow root. So you've actually come across this many times. It's been around for many years, but we're finally getting access to that. So shadow root is not just important in web components, it's actually a really cool feature overall. So what we've created so far is I have a name tag with role and name, and I've created a shadow root with all of that information, and the name and root goes there. I think I've covered everything in this slide, so I'm not going to cover this slide. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to do one more example, which is I'm going to create a shadow root, and I'm going to put a paragraph in it. And here you see it's red. Right? This is the page CSS, and this is part of a shadow root. So why is it red? It's still going to inherit some features from its parent. Color is inherited. If I change this, however, to P, and we all know it's a P from the previous page, it won't, because it's not inheriting from a parent paragraph, it's actually its own paragraph. But if I did shadow p than it is red again. Okay, so that's, oops. Okay, so here's a few CSS selectors that you might want to know when you're talking about the parent and or imported and importee. There's unresolved, so when you create a custom element and the JavaScript hasn't actually happened yet, you want to list it as unresolved, and you probably want to do a display none or opacity 0. You maybe not want to do display none because then it won't display. But at least that way it won't show until it's resolved. So there is actually a pseudo class until the JavaScript has created your custom element. Then there's the host, which is the parent. You can actually target something within the parent with the parentheses and do all that. So the shadow root is everything that's within the shadow root. And the host is the div name tag. And if you see down here, this is part of the host, these 2 lines, but this is not rendered. The host is not rendered. It's the shadow root that is. So this will show up in your developer tools, but it's actually placed within here. Okay. I think I talked enough about that. So let's go on to imports. We've all used imports before. Yes?
And content is what browsers support content?
Everyone that supports the Shadow DOM supports it. So there should have been something at the beginning. Whatever supports shadow root supports content. Okay, so import, this is from 1999. I actually pulled this from a site of mine when I did a Perl script. And it wasn't actually a template because I just wanted to see how many people had visited my site, and not that many did. But I had a little counter, and I basically used the CGI for an import. So we're kind of used to it. But now we have it basically on crack. So it's the link element, and is it supported? You just do is an import, you create a link, and you're like, is import in it? If it is, it's supported. If it's not supported. Unfortunately, right here it says Firefox half. Firefox is going to be a no. Right now it's behind a flag in Firefox, but they just came out and, a few weeks ago and said that they will not be supporting it in its current setting. But there are polylifills for it. Okay, so how do we actually import? We do a link rel import. We can do, a path. We can make it HTTP or HTTPS, depending on what or we can have it actually on an external site. Just note that it needs to be CORS enabled. You have to give the right permissions for the, if it's on a different server, you have to actually write on your server that that is okay. CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing. So in our case, we are importing our name tag. Very simple. I'm cheating a little bit for space, and I'm putting my event handlers directly on the element. Don't do this. Put it in your script, but I just wanted to show it up here. So we're going to have a load handler, because there is a load event, and there's an error event. And so we're going to import it, and we're going to run a script once it loads. And if you look here, the only thing I have is my 3 name tags. I don't have the template anymore. This is a really short document. To send this from the server is awesome. And then it pulls this other file. And the thing is, if I import this import 27 times, it will only import it once. And so this is my name tag template. It has the template as a shell, the style, and the HTML that you saw. Oops. I went in which direction? That went pretty far. Okay. That's it. That's a template. The CSS and the HTML. Okay. So what do I do? This JavaScript looks familiar to you for the most part, except for import. The content, I'm importing content from my import. I'm saying query selector link rel type import, which is the one in the header. And here it will just pick the first because I use query selector. I could have also done query selector all if I had more imports and then loop through it. And I import them. And the content of the template is the content of my name tab template that I imported. This being the content here and showing it again here. It's not a special, I probably should have used a different variable. But it's the content of my template, or my import, that I'm now putting in as my template. And then I'm looping through it for all of my elements, and cloning, and creating the shadow root. That's one way of doing it. Until we get to custom elements, I'm going to actually have to loop through them. Custom elements will do the looping for me, because it will say every time it hits a custom element, it will call that function again. So that's why I keep looping through it, but at the end, you don't actually need to loop through it. So when I import something, it's similar to the shadow DOM, where you have basically two DOM interfaces. You have the document DOM structure, or DOM tree, and then you have the shadow root, or in this case, the template, the import DOM tree. So we can use all the JavaScript that we know how to use, but they're under two different, basically two different trees, so that one thing won't impact the other. So if you actually did how many outers do we have on a page, they're in the shadow root right now, so it would be 0, right? But you could actually say within my shadow roots, how many outers do I have, and it would find the 3 of them. Okay, so how do you activate it? Well, nothing happens until it's activated, and we activate it with a few lines of JavaScript. So we import it, we import the node, and then we append the child, and we're good to go. So I'm going to show you an inactive, if this loads. Okay, so I've loaded this template, but I have not activated it yet. So now I'm going to open it up again. Oops. Come on, let me do this. There we go. And here, one thing to note is the media has not loaded, because so even though the page loaded first and then it activated it, it did not actually load the image. And so I prevented it with this alert, and now it's going to load it. So when I was saying that that custom elements actually allow you to do better performance, it's not loading all the assets until you need them. But realize that so you can preload the assets if you do need them. But it's a good way to improve performance. Okay. The only part that was, I won't cover that. Okay. So imports allow you to include and reuse documents, or just simply document fragments, because I could have put 16 templates in that element, and I could have just gotten them by ID. It has to be same origin. And the doc and the import share a window, so window dot will hit both of them, but document dot is actually just the parent document. And I'm showing this here, which is the importer is the parent doc, or the document, and the importee is the document current script owner document. Okay, so last we have custom elements. So we're going to get to the point where we just have the word name tag. And so this is a custom element. It's very semantic, but it doesn't exist. So we need to create this element so that we can do stuff with it. We could actually use just name tag, and the CSS in most browsers, except for IE8 and earlier, will actually render it, but it doesn't provide us with all the whistles and bells. So when you create a custom element, there's two ways to do it. Either just by saying name tag, creating your own element name, or by using an element that already exists, and that the prototype of that element will be the prototype of this custom element. So this div is a name tag. It's basically extending the existing element of div, but you could extend a button or whatever. And if you do want to create buttons with all the features, you might want to extend the button instead of creating a new element. So to create a custom element, the name has to be 2 words. It could be more, I guess, but it has to be all lowercase, and it has to contain that hyphen. Otherwise, it won't work. And then so that's step number 1, is to come up with the name. Step number 2 is to define its prototype, and step number 3 is to register it. So the custom element that you import, you don't necessarily need to import it, but because you can have it in the page, but just to show that all of these 4 features are used together, the custom element that you import creates a shadow DOM from a template, and then you register it. So why register a prototype? You get 4 features when you register a prototype. You get 4 callbacks. You get the created callback, the attached callback, the detached, and the attribute change callback. And they're kind of all self-explanatory as to what they do. So to register an element, you basically just say register element, and then you give it the custom element name. I guess it would be in quotes. And by default, that custom element will have the HTML element prototype, like just a regular nondescript. But you can actually give it a specific prototype. You can declare which prototype you want. So in this case right here, I created the prototype using the video element. And then you can attach all these callbacks. And just as this example here, I'm going to open this in a new window, and I created this prototype of a static button. Doesn't do anything. But if I actually open up here and I go to console, you'll see that those callback events were called. It created the custom element, it was added, it was created, the attributes were altered, and it was added again. Because there's a lot more JavaScript that I did if you did do a view source just to make those happen. And we exit so that we can go back to the talk. Okay. In ECMAScript 6, and we're not there yet, you'll actually be able to do a class myButtonExtends button, and you'll be able to do the syntax, which is, for some of you is much more familiar. For me, I prefer the old style JavaScript because I'm used to it. Okay, so then you register the element. You've created the element, then you register it, and you just basically document register of element, and you do myButton and whatever the prototype is. You can do, this is the default, so you could just leave this, no, this is not the default. The default is, I believe that. Okay. Then you can create with a specific, it can just be one that exists, or you can create a very long prototype. And then once you create an element, you can either create a different element based off of that element. You can actually use the prototype of an element you created, so you can extend your own elements. So to include it, including these new elements, this is my favorite way of doing it. It's just saying myButton and putting it in my HTML. But you can attach it with the DOM as well. Okay. And then here, this is an extended, and it's extending button, which I prefer because it actually uses the native features of the button element in the browser. The other way to do it, it sounds like it would extend the default of the browser, but it doesn't. It actually just, you have to reattach everything to it. So if you're going to use something with a GUI, you might want to extend it this way. Okay. So I talked a little bit about this, so I won't go into depth about it because we're running out of time. But you have unresolved elements. You can reach the shadow. You can reach within the shadow. And you can target the elements with CSS. Okay, and you can target the host context. Okay, so what do we have? We have these name tags now that we're going to register. They have names and roles. We create a callback. We create the element. And when it's already in the document, so you see here in my HTML, I have this name tag. I have it 3 times. So unlike when we were using the template, right, and we had to iterate through it, every time it hits the element name tag, it's going to run through this. So I no longer have to force it to loop. It loops on its own, because every time it hits the name tag, it actually goes through this. So it creates a callback, it creates the clone, and that's when it puts all the content into that parent name tag. So we now have this as our HTML and this as our output. So I know creating a name tag is not the most exciting thing in the world, but I want to create simple code that you can go back to and actually go, and because this was probably 30 to 40 minutes now instead of just 30 minutes, but that's why I went before lunch, because I knew we were going to go over. This showed you how to do it, so hopefully you understand the general ideas, but all the code and every single is there, and every single one of these has the actual code example for the example in the page. So it's right there, you click on that, and you're good to go. So that's basically it for my talk, but I do want to say this is the link for it. It's going to be up there forever. It might have a different look of a different name tag, because that one is just really ugly, and I might do this talk again. But here is the Polymer project for a polyfill. Here is webcomponents.org, which is great articles about web components. And if you want to follow me or do anything, this is all my contact information. So thank you very much.